Different types of inflation. One of the goals of this guide is that you be completely comfortable discussing and using inflation. However, if you were to stop at this point and then open a newspaper in a few days, you might find reference to things we have not discussed at all, such as core inflation, headline inflation, year-on-year inflation, deflation, and so on. In this section, we explain these terms. Headline inflation is the most commonly reported inflation number, the one that is usually in the headlines. Headline inflation is essentially the one we have been calculating by comparing annual CPI for 2 years and looking at growth. However, inflation is often calculated for a month rather than a year. Monthly inflation means exactly what it sounds like: the change in prices over a month. But be careful. Usually monthly inflation is converted into annual inflation to be used as the headline inflation number. This just involves saying, what would annual inflation be if the monthly inflation for this month continued for 12 months? So, if monthly inflation is 1%, this means prices are going up 1% per month. If we wanted to annualize this, we would be asking, if prices go up every month by 1% for 12 months, how much will they go up over the whole year? The answer to this becomes the headline inflation number. Unfortunately, you cannot get the answer to this by simply multiplying 1% by 12, because that is not how percentages work. For now, assume that if inflation is 1% per month, annual inflation can be calculated with this formula. Core inflation is based on headline inflation, but it excludes certain goods and services. Why? Certain goods and services have prices which change a lot. If we include them, they can make it seem like the overall economy has price levels that are also changing a lot and are very unpredictable. But if we exclude them, we can get a better sense of what is happening to the economy as a whole and over a longer time period. Usually, the key things excluded from core inflation are food and energy. Both food and energy frequently experience sharp rises or falls in prices that are unrelated to the rest of the economy. The graphic shows a comparison of headline and core inflation over time in the Eurozone. You can see that headline inflation bounces up and down a lot more than core inflation. Seasonal adjustment. If we just look at the monthly inflation rate and then assume it will continue for 12 months, we may miss the fact that prices tend to rise faster at certain times of the year than others. This may be related to seasonal factors such as weather, which affect how much money and goods are flowing through the economy. Between harvests, for example, the price of certain agricultural goods may increase due to a smaller supply. But these price pressures will reduce with the next harvest. If these kinds of changes in prices are regular and predictable, inflation figures can be adjusted to reduce their impact on the overall inflation rate. By doing this, we can strip away these factors and see what is actually happening over a longer period to prices in the economy. The easiest way to think about seasonal adjustment is this. Suppose that overall in the economy, prices are rising slowly over the course of the year at 1% per month, and maize is also following that pattern. Then suppose that in June, between 2 harvest seasons, the price of maize rises by 20%. By July, the price has fallen back to where it would have been if prices had continued to rise smoothly by 1%. If this kind of thing happens every year, we can say that the June spike in maize prices adds to inflation in June, and we can remove it from our measure of inflation. Of course, seasonal adjustments are done not only for maize, but for a number of other goods and services that have seasonal variation of this type. Seasonal adjustments are important for economic policy because they help us to understand overall trends in the economy and to separate these from short-term and sudden changes that will be reversed without policy intervention. However, these short-term changes are important for consumers and should not be ignored when looking at issues that can affect ordinary people. For example, while the price of maize may fall back to a normal range after June, it can cause hardship for poor consumers during the month of June and should not be ignored. Year-on-year inflation, also called year-over-year inflation. Year-on-year inflation means that the inflation rate in a particular month is being compared to the rate of change in prices in the same month the previous year. For example, a newspaper might report that inflation in August 2011 was 4%, compared to 2% in August 2010. This allows a comparison of estimated annual inflation for any 2 years at the same point in time during the year. Both the 4% rate and the 2% rate are based on the change in prices from July of 2011 and 2010 respectively. This monthly change is then annualized, meaning we assume prices continue to change at this rate for 12 months. In looking at whether inflation is increasing, we can compare the change in prices between July and August 2011, or we can compare our estimate of annual inflation based on August 2011 to what we estimated in August 2010. It is also possible to compare the CPI in August 2010 to the CPI in August 2011 directly and describe annual inflation between August 2010 and August 2011. This is sometimes called 12-month overall inflation or 12-month rolling inflation, since the start date for the 12 months continues to roll forward each month. Deflation. Prices also sometimes fall. Deflation is the opposite of inflation. It can be calculated the same way as the growth rate of prices, except in this case it will be a negative growth rate. Deflation is a rare condition, but it can happen in difficult economic times. Prices usually fall as a result of large declines in consumer spending, sometimes associated with recessions or depressions. Generally, when people lose their jobs or see large drops in their incomes, they are forced to cut their spending, which means that prices usually fall due to low demand. This situation is temporary, though it can persist for long periods if the economy does not recover.